Once again, we were slowly pulling along the road, in the direction of the head sentinel. Now that I had tanks at my disposal, I wasn't quite sure what to do with them. They would be most useful in case of extreme danger. I assumed that it would be possible to use them to block some point. I looked at the road, thinking of what might have happened to Horst. He should have joined us about 10 minutes ago. The infantry had moved off the road, letting us pass. It was already moving too slowly because hundreds of ambulances and trucks were rushing in both directions. The rain had stopped gradually, and stars began to peek through the clouds in some places in the sky, but the road and the woods were still as dark as the seabed. All I could see was a great deal of junk, wood and stones lying haphazardly all over the road. I began to look again and suddenly noticed a man standing in the middle of the road with his arms crossed over his head. Recognizing him as Horst, I immediately stopped. "Where is your motorcycle?" I asked. "I'm sorry, but I had to leave it with Erich. I decided not to take the same road as you and lost 10 minutes because you took a southeasterly direction. I never would have guessed you'd go that way. For 10 minutes I almost ran to catch up with you in time. I wasn't wearing the proper uniform to get a car or other means of transportation to get me here. So I had to get here on foot. Now I'm going to surprise you. I saw about 50 tanks moving toward the head sentinel. I hope the guys who stayed there are okay. We cut down the trees and blew up the bridge, remember? We can point those tanks over there now." "To hell with talking," I replied. "We should try to outrun them." We rushed down the road at the full speed that tanks can reach. "What is Erich doing with the bike?" I asked Horst. I sent him to overtake the tanks and try to come first to the head sentinel, and there warn Bock to come up with a reason for them to send them back unopposed. If we get there in time, I think we can set up a post and send them back along the road, and then turn northeast. There's a bridge that runs along the road for 4 kilometers and hasn't been destroyed yet. It leads to the other side of the lake, and where it ends there are other tank detachments. They are separated from each other by about 12 kilometers, and when the bridge explodes, they will not be able to do anything. They will have to swim to get back to the main road." I looked at Horst, impressed by his idea. "How did you manage to find out everything about the road and the lake?" He smiled and answered, "You see, the main cable leading from Odessa to Moscow runs just through that very small road. When my guys and I worked there to destroy the connection between the cities, I memorized that road. There must still be about 10 or 15 of our boys on that stretch. Also, because of the past rainstorm, the ground has softened up a lot, and the tanks will simply get bogged down if they want to get off the road. They won't even be able to turn around." "Where's the road?" "Through a small ravine to the state farms, and then changes direction, obviously to Sevastopol." "Can't they take a detour?" "No way. See those mountains?" I nodded. "They'll get lost in them before they get to the road." "How far up does the road go where you were?" "Straight up into the mountains, and then it disappears. It's a hell of a way to find it. Besides, it's all the more blurry up there. If they get up that high, they won't have enough fuel to get back. We can blow up the bridge, in case they manage to get back, and we ourselves take a favorable position. Our 3 tanks can hold them off while we blow the bridge and hide in the tunnel. We can let the Russians walk a few hundred meters and then strike before they realize who we are. First, we block their road, and second, if they try to get off it, their way will be blocked by the lake on one side and the swamps on the other. And when the tanks start coming back, we can shoot them down one by one." "You're a genius, Horst. You should have been in charge for a while instead of that worthless lieutenant. Now we just had to hope that the Russians could be confused on the head patrol." I stopped the column and briefly explained to the squad leaders our plan regarding the tanks. I had no assurance that radio communications were not tapped. Having said all, I ordered Lieutenant Wolf to stay on the road, and Horst moved to his tank. After that, everyone else moved toward the head sentinel. It was only 7 kilometers to our destination, but we drove hard and slow on a road crowded with traffic, and our speed did not exceed 10 kilometers per hour. After half an hour we turned a corner and suddenly saw tanks creeping towards us. They seemed to be in a great hurry, but when our columns equalized, the commander's tank stood up and a young general jumped out of it. I stopped the column and he came up, talking very loudly. The Germans broke our left flank, and we must immediately come to the rescue and cut off the enemy's way. "That is correct, General," I replied, "but I have orders from the Supreme Commander-in-Chief to go to the head sentry, and I was also told that you have already blocked the Germans' further advance on the left flank." He looked at me fearfully and quickly ran to his tank. Once inside, he raised a pointer above his head, signalling the others to follow. They sped off at an even faster speed, leaving us behind them instantly. Suddenly I found myself wanting to laugh. I could not believe that the Russians could be so gullible. I thanked God that we had horsed. It took him a few minutes to come up with a grand plan. I commanded to drive as fast as possible, now without ceremony, running over anyone in our way. Military trucks were whizzing by in all directions, and it wasn't until 30 minutes later that we reached the city. Bock, without waiting for us to set up the tanks under the trees, ran up and got into my armoured car. "Thank God you are here," he said. "I've already lost 9 men. The damned Russians discovered the catch when they drove into the swamps. Not only that, they managed to get out by clearing the road from the piled-up trees and send a group of men here. We have 2 machine guns. They're on the other side of the bridge. But they suddenly attacked the guys in the dark and passed on the head sentinel. At 1 o'clock in the morning, it was a fun place to be. We had the advantage, so it was all over. But I lost 9 men of my squad. I sent 1 tank down to the bridge to keep them out if they suddenly decided to try again. Of course, from where they are now, they can't see the road, so they won't risk driving down an unfamiliar path, but they might try swimming, and I don't have that many men to control the whole river." "All right, Bock," I said. "We'll assign you 9 tanks to go down to the river. Each one has at least 220 to 240 shells. I think they will help you stand and get all the unwanted ones out of the way. You will open a barrage and fire machine gun bursts into the field. They will think the Germans are attacking them while under cover, which is true to some extent. Moreover, we need the uniforms of the German shock troops so that we can force them to retreat. But it's better not to do that, at least not yet. 9 tanks should be enough to solve this problem, and here, on patrol. I will leave you a couple more, yes, 1 you have, so that you can line them up in defence and be covered from all sides, so you will have a reliable stronghold, a fortress." 5 tanks I sent back towards Odessa. Then I remembered something. "By the way, Bock, how did you think of sending those tanks that met us on the way to the left flank?" "It didn't take any special brains," he answered modestly. "Just luck. As soon as Erich got there, I started calling our switchboard, but for the 5 minutes I held the phone, there was no answer. I had given up all hope, but then I managed to make contact. And do you know what they told me? None of the lines connecting to Odessa were working, and they had just gone to bed because there was nothing else to do. I said that I would shoot those sleeping at the post myself if it happened again, and then I called Vogel to the machine. I gave him the task of copying the general's voice, which he had heard so many times, and if he failed, he could consider himself a corpse. I briefly instructed him what commands he would give to the tank squad, and told him to send them to the left flank. He whistled and spoke in the voice of the Führer. And you know, at first I thought it was really Hitler speaking. I was already tired, and his voice finally knocked me out of my rut. And then I saw the first tank coming towards us, and I hung up. When I stopped it, I got a real shock, because the general himself came out of the tank. I looked at him, dumbfounded, but still managed to pull myself together and calmly told him that he was asked to come to the phone. When he picked up the phone, his voice became too stern. "Get me the army commander," he barked. I heard the liaison on the other end of the wire say, "Yes, Comrade General Smolinov, but you'll have to wait 2 minutes." My knees shook. All I could think about was that the damned general should not suspect anything. When the phone rang, I could clearly make out the swearing coming out of the receiver. It was the voice of the marshal himself. The general only managed to answer, "Yes, Comrade Marshal. No, Comrade Marshal. Immediately, Comrade Marshal." And then the phone at the other end of the wire was disconnected. I almost collapsed on the floor from relief. For a very long time the general just stood and looked at the receiver in his hand, and then angrily threw it on the floor and muttered something incoherent under his nose. Heading for his tanks, he told them to turn again in the direction of Odessa and go even faster than before. If I was not dying of exhaustion, I would certainly have died of laughter. As soon as all the tanks pulled away, I grabbed the telephone receiver. Vogel was still on the wire. I knew it was him because he answered in a different voice each time. I told him that everything turned out great, that you'd be pleased, and that in general this would all be over soon. I nodded and turned to Willie. "Take up positions on the river, Willie. I don't have to tell you how to do it, but remember, keep them at gunpoint. When they clear the road, shoot. And don't forget to shoot across the field. That's a sure way to find out if there's anybody alive among them or not." "Well, Willie, old boy, I say au revoir. If I don't see you when it's all over, I'll meet you at the gates of hell." We shook hands, and then he turned abruptly and headed for the first tank. 5 seconds later, they were on their way down to the river. I turned to Bock again. "Drive your tanks away from the main road about 100 meters, but make sure they don't get bogged down. Keep them under cover. That way, if anyone tries to surprise us, they'll have to deal with you first. Keep in radio contact with Willie, but explain yourself in code so no one else can understand you. Leave the cars and phones on head patrol, but no more than 2 men. In the event of a surprise attack, they're the only ones you'll lose. Where's Schmidt now?" "In one of the tanks. Call him and tell him to bring the map we got at the Russian Air Force base." Schmidt showed up not a minute later. It was raining again, so we climbed into one of the trucks. The sky was beginning to lighten, and we could see the map well enough without a flashlight. The first thing Schmidt pointed out was the location of the air base, which was for civilian purposes only. But that didn't interest me. Then he drew a pencil across the map. "This is the ring road around Odessa. Do you see the main highway that leads out of Odessa where you turn to get here? Yes. You continue on the ring road to the northwest, and then you hit a road that has woods on both sides of it. Then you turn and continue for about 3 kilometers, and then at the first sign you turn south. This is a gravel road, and there you will be completely surrounded by forest. After 1.5 kilometers, you will see a guard post, and right behind it is an open airfield. There are many military and transport planes there, and all of them are hidden in the forest. The passage to the runway is all built up with green-coloured metal barns, and there are also camouflaged houses in the forest. From the air, they look like part of the forest. I got the information from our guys who work in that area, and then I double-checked everything myself. I investigated the base thoroughly and found out that they have only small-caliber anti-air artillery, and no other weapons at all." "That's fine. You can stay in my armoured car." We shook hands. No need to wait too long. Willie was taking barrage fire from 3 tanks at the same time. Those who didn't know might think that at least 100 batteries were firing. This should have had a good effect. The Russians should move out of the way or perhaps abandon their tanks and scatter in different directions. I sat down in the car next to Schmidt. What is decided must be done, no matter how much I would like to stay with the guys. Then I remembered something and waved for Bock to come over. "Listen, Bock, we left only 1 tank at the place where the other squad turned toward the river. Contact the guys on the hill immediately to make contact with the ones on the bridge. If they don't have wires, have them cut the ones to Odessa. All they have to do is have constant contact with that tank. If it gets off the road, it might blow up on the bridge, and then they can't put it back together in pieces if it hasn't already happened." Bock nodded, and I began to move back toward Odessa, leading the 5 remaining tanks. I wished the road would never end. I knew that we were going on a mission, in case of failure of which we would have to commit suicide. But an order is an order, and the job must be done. And yet my thoughts kept returning to those 2 tank units. I could hardly imagine the end of the situation. Shortly before the turn, I thought that at the airfield 2 armoured cars we do not need, and sent them with a report to Horst on the bridge. Then I moved to the tank that followed first. I had the map of the airfield in my head, and no one but Schmidt knew yet where we were going. It was better that none of them knew anything for as long as possible. That way they wouldn't make any plans in advance. Before turning onto the road going through the forest, I pulled over to the side of the road and stopped the tanks. First, I told the situation to those who were travelling with me. Then, moving to the next tank, told them the same thing, and so on. I didn't risk using radio communication. We moved on. The bumpy roads made our vehicles bounce. The infantrymen continued toward the front. When I thought about what was happening, it all seemed fantastic, but this was a real war. Several heavy machine guns were being carried on tractors. They were carrying many other weapons, but from what I could see, nothing at the moment could stop the invading German army. The sound of artillery volleys came closer and closer. The sky became perfectly clear again. A new day had dawned. 6:30 in the morning, 2 German fighter planes showed up from the north, bombing the road with their machine guns, destroying everything in their path. We pulled into the woods to wait for them to pass. Damn them, I thought. If we weren't so close to the woods, they might have smeared us on the road. They were a real danger now, not only to the Russians but to ourselves as well. After all, we were riding in Russian tanks and wearing Russian uniforms. 2 tanks came under fire and overturned and caught fire, and again there were dead men lying on the road. As soon as the planes were out of sight, people rushed to clear the road. But not for us. We turned back to the highway and went at high speed in the direction of Odessa. The sun was already high and the road was clearly visible for miles ahead. So far no obstacles were in our way. I saw the passing infantrymen looking at us, and on their faces I could read disgust. If the tanks were leaving the front at breakneck speed, what was in store for them? And could we blame them for that? At last we reached the first turn. Even here the crowds of military men mingled with ordinary citizens. Most of them were leaving Odessa, trying to make their way south. People were dragging bundles of hastily gathered belongings in their hands, bending under the weight of children sitting on their backs. Some travelled on horse-drawn carts, but the bulk of them walked. Even if they had any transportation, everything was now forcibly given to the front. They looked tired, shattered, and from the look of them, no one had any hope of a favourable outcome. Turning into the forest, we found ourselves on an abandoned road. There was no one here because everyone knew it would lead nowhere. After driving a little further inland, I ordered the guys to get out of their vehicles and gather around me, putting the tanks close together. Then, opening a paper bag and taking out a map of the airfield, I showed the entrance and the guard houses at the very end of the road, as well as the boundary of the base. I had 5 tanks and a total of 30 men. When we stand, I told them, we are surrounded by 4 boundaries, north, south, west, and east. I want you to use only strong explosives, not anti-tank mines. If you can, use incendiary bombs, because then the fire will instantly cover the largest area in the shortest possible time. It is necessary, if possible, to get in quickly and get out just as quickly. Leave 1 man to sit hidden behind each tank and watch to see if any of the pilots or infantry show themselves. In this case, I think it would be best to fire a close-range weapon, if you can, naturally, because it will not be easy to fire and maneuver among the trees at the same time. But in case of an unsuitable situation, look at the situation. Attack, retreat, and go forward again. If you can get to the airfield, start blowing up at one edge of it, and then run to the other side, destroying everything that gets under your feet. Each of you can take 1 section. It'll be easier that way. I'll take the main entrance. You need to disarm the guards, and then immediately get to the airfield and wait for the plane to prepare for takeoff. When you're done, surround the area and open fire on anyone who comes forward. Is that clear? The tank commanders responded with a nod. Good. Then proceed with the mission, and I wish you good luck. 4 tanks moved off, but I waited 20 minutes to give them enough time to take their positions near the borders of the airfield. The road was clear and I could move at high speed. After a stretch of road, I told the tank commander to turn off in the direction where the gatehouses were located. It was only half a kilometre to the airbase, and we caught them by surprise. A machine gun burst hit the guard post before they could realise anything. The guardhouse was blown to pieces a few seconds after the second shot. Immediately we drove on. So far we had encountered no one else. We rumbled through the last half-kilometre at a speed of 50 kilometres per hour. I leaned half out of the tank, trying to see mines or anything else that might have caused us to be trapped. We were almost at the entrance to the base when I noticed several seemingly innocuous-looking buildings concentrated in one place, just a little deep in the woods, on either side of the road. It looked like a small village. I bit my lip to keep from swearing out loud. I didn't have a clue. After giving the order to stop immediately, I told the boys to get ready to fire on the buildings. We only had one gun, but at least we could try. We need to fire, reload the guns, and fire again. Do everything faster than ever. God only knows what kind of fight back we'd get. A few Russian military men cautiously stepped out of the premises, apparently to take a look at the uninvited guests. Suddenly, I heard machine gun fire from one side. The Russians did not yet realize what was happening. Firing from other tanks started a few seconds later, then we joined in. The guys were firing at the wooden hut closest to them, and it was engulfed in flames almost instantly. 5 seconds later, our second line blew the heads off several Russians at once, and the next one blew off the rest. We did not stop for more than 5 to 7 seconds, and the shells were whistling into the wooden buildings. The pilots rushed scattering in all directions, across the field, into the forest, but we could not be stopped, and they had no time to run, and a few meters, fell dead. But the Russians were not going to surrender without resistance. From somewhere they had anti-tank weapons, or maybe anti-aircraft weapons. I could not determine exactly at that moment. The artillery fire that followed at the very beginning missed us, piercing a tree on our right. I gave the order to turn in the opposite direction and hide in a low bush at the edge of the forest, literally 50 meters from where we were now, but continuing to take deadly fire. The firing on the part of the Russians had quieted down. We tensely awaited the next attack. The Russians did not know where we were, nor were we sure of their whereabouts. It was a test of whose nerves were stronger, who could hold out longer. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, one well-placed blow on their part, and there would be no trace of us left. I could hear a bird singing in the forest behind us, and another bird singing back. The wind rustled fallen leaves and pine needles, bringing to us the crackling sounds of burning wooden buildings. The tanks that stood on the borders of the airfield continued their shelling. I waited in a kind of daze, unable to take my eyes off the flames of the fire. Besides, my task was to record what caught fire and when. Another shell squealed just a few centimeters from our tank and fell behind us in the woods. I didn't have time to look back and see what it was. I cursed. We'd almost been hit, but at least now I knew exactly where the enemy was. We waited. The next volley came, and this time I was sure of what I needed. 45 seconds, I shouted. Aim at a 48-degree angle. Fire! Before the Russians could strike the next blow, we, ahead of the enemy, fired twice at them. Bullets and shells flew into the target, only sometimes hitting close to it. We stopped. Dead silence. If their cannon were not out of action, they would blow us away now, so I gave the command to fall back along the road, shooting everything in sight. Then I saw a whole battery of artillery guns on our right. We were out of direct fire range, but the tanks kept pulling up, and they weren't our tanks. 3 hours. Distance 700 meters, I said to my gunners. The artillerymen didn't know where we were yet. They kept the barrels of their guns turned in all directions. This target was a little far away, but with 2 hits we could take out a couple of cannons. The boys opened fire. Ammunition exploded one after another, and now the Russians could not return fire because they could not see us, Our tank drove out of cover, making an excellent target for anyone around, but our guns shook everything in the neighbourhood, and machine guns were slashing across the field, preventing the Russians from getting close to their guns. Then, 500 metres away, I noticed huge camouflage nets stretched at least 30 metres high. I didn't know what was really under them, but presumably there could be airplanes there, perhaps in camouflaged hangars. I gave the order, "Prepare to engage, hit the target, fire when ready." Our tank slowly turned the cannon in the right direction and the guys opened fire. 2 shells hit the steel net and disappeared, and a few seconds later there was a terrible rumble of a fantastically powerful explosion that shook the air. From the recoil of our tank shook so that he, like a horse, stood on his haunches and again lowered to the ground. Obviously, I had made a small mistake. This was not an airplane hangar, but a bomb bay. I lowered myself into the tank, quickly closing the latch over my head. "Let's get out of here," I shouted. We were speeding away, but the shrapnel that exploded from the explosion rained down on the tank. The noise it made inside the tank was unbearable. It seemed as if, instead of the small pieces of metal mesh that had reached us, the outside of the tank was being scraped by multi-ton pieces of steel, ready to burst inside. The scraping noise inside the tank filled our ears, and even the continuing rumble of the artillery pieces became muffled. I kept the lid closed, and then deliberately peeked out to get a glimpse of what was going on around us. We were now crossing the opposite side of the field, but I could see that the entire area and the storage facilities within it were on fire. The bombs were still going off, but the worst was what was happening in the sky over our heads. Several airplanes were circling over the field, trying in vain to fly out of the airfield because the tank standing closest to them immediately opened fire and shot them down like ducks. I heard the firing of several machine guns at the same time, but whose they were and where they were located I could not tell. Suddenly there was another explosion, and great tongues of flame soared into the sky. The sound of such force could mean only one thing. The fuel depot at the base was destroyed, so the Air Force no longer existed here. Watching the fire, I felt very solid and confident. We drove to the border, where on the left side were ours, continuing to shoot everything in front of us. The only thing I was afraid of was falling into a trap, which could have been the metal mesh surrounding the area. We drove slowly, shooting at the sides and at airplanes, and in general at all moving objects. Suddenly there was a direct hit from the cannons on us. I cursed. We were crawling with nothing to cover us, so we had to get out of sight as quickly as possible, get off the field and hide among the trees. I decided to ride ahead and shouted to the guys, "Let's get out of here quickly, drive into the low bushes." It was better than blowing up on this trail. The tank rumbled as we left, driven by gunfire. I had no idea where they were firing at us from and realized we weren't going to make it to cover. Several Russian pilots surrounding our tank came so close that we didn't even have time to aim at them. But we didn't move for fear of being wiped out by the artillery men, who were also cunning. They stopped firing so as not to give away their location. I hoped with all my soul that we had really destroyed their communications. The battlefield was getting hot, unbearably hot from blown-up airplanes and burning fuel. The fire had already spread to the trees, the grass was smouldering and the ground was melting. But despite the smoke screen, I managed to make out a tank standing on the left side. Quickly, before it could still point its cannon at us, I shouted into the radio, "Receive, how do you hear? Calling first, calling second." I was speaking German now. There was no point in pretending to be Russian anymore. The answer came immediately. "Second on the line, I see you. I received a cipher from HQ, from Captain Stockhausen, a code message especially for you. Second, this is first. Contact Central Control. Have them make a request to the Führer's headquarters. Who is Captain Stockhausen? I have no desire to be ambushed by the Russians." 20 minutes later, I received confirmation of the authenticity of the message. Calling second again, I said, "Don't shoot from where you are now." It seemed to me that the end of the world was coming. The field stretching in front of me and the trees beginning behind it were not visible. The artillery battery had stopped firing, and I decided to seize the moment and find out what the situation was like in the other tanks. The Russians would not be able to hear our conversation, as we had set our own frequency, and I doubted very much that their radio installations, if there were any left, would catch our wave. Three, come in, I said. Are you on the wire? We're all right, came the reply. By now we have 40-odd planes destroyed, the trees are on fire, terrible heat all around. But while travelling along the border going from south to east, 2 guns opened fire on us. I didn't even turn the muzzle of the tank on them, but just shot them down with a machine gun so that they wouldn't get in the way on the road. 4, I'm 1, over. I heard everything, answered me, but we were less lucky than you guys. The pilots we had to fight were outnumbered here. The truth is, we're going around in circles right now like the rest of the world. The surviving pilots and technicians are now scattered over many kilometres, and all they have to do is just keep watch over our territory and shoot whatever they can find. Sometimes they even have to jump out of their tanks to do it. You're getting a little cocky out there. Don't make heroes of yourselves, I answered sternly. Fifth, first on the line. What are you doing? Damn you, Captain, you almost levelled us when you were shooting at the battery. If you'd been a better shot out there, I'd be out of an eye at best. We're not done yet. We hit a camouflage trail that leads eastward, and I want to see what's there. Be extremely careful, I replied quickly. I think it's better to wait until the 3rd tank has completed its actions on the southern border and can cover you. 5th, do you hear me? I hastily looked around the field, but did not see anything. 5th, do not hear the answer? I repeated 3 times, but heard nothing in reply. 3, move in their direction, but for God's sake pay attention. Check what happened. Be careful, you might hit a mine. The spreading fire was now everywhere, almost completely surrounding the airbase. We couldn't stay here any longer, but still, it wasn't easy to get out. 2, I'm first. Cover us while we try to get out of this hole, and be ready to repel the attack if they open fire on us. We moved off, but there was a lull. I had no doubt that the enemy was still to be in the vicinity, but perhaps because the fire kept shifting farther and farther away, the enemy had to retreat. I gave the command to withdraw quickly into the woods. Just as we took cover in the trees, there was a sound like a sledgehammer hitting my head. It was a shell that whistled past us and exploded behind the tank, hitting a tree. Then I felt a scalding blow in my back, and warm blood flowed down, instantly soaking my shirt. I realized this was bad. Guys, I'm hurt. How? Where? How bad? I tensed up and gritted my teeth. I don't know. Every word I said hurt all over my body. The 2nd, seeing what had happened, returned fire. The enemy's shells flew like lightning but did not hit the target. We were still waiting. We must attack, I said. 2 machine guns and cannons of both tanks now worked tirelessly, but the Russians had gone into the trenches, and there was no way to reach them. The barrels of their guns were visible only a metre, maybe a little more, from the ground. I felt that my strength was gradually leaving me, and I began to weaken, but clinging to the gun barrel, I decided not to give up and fight to the end. I realized that the longer I could stay conscious while concentrating, the better for me. Keep firing and advancing, zigzagging, I shouted. The tank suddenly jerked. Nausea came to my throat, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I found myself lying on a woolen, damp blanket on the ground. What happened? We blew up. The tank driver's dead. The others are all right. What about the 2nd? I could hardly say the words. My back was burning, and every breath I took hurt like hell. They're all right, Captain. The enemy has been destroyed. I lost consciousness again, and time lost all meaning. Now I knew firsthand what it was like to be wounded. When I regained consciousness, I only had time to feel a pleasant warmth, lightness in my body, and a wish that this state would not leave me. Then I fell into unconsciousness again, and all thoughts and feelings left me. I felt as if I were deep, deep underwater, in total darkness, and somewhere in the distance above me a faint ray of sunlight was piercing its way through the gloom. I tried to swim out, but it was as if something was pulling me back, and I stayed where I was. It seemed like hours to me, and the longer I swam, the farther away was the surface. I continued to struggle until finally, unexpectedly, I opened my eyes again. I saw the guys sitting near one of the tanks with their heads thrown back and resting. Two of them were on either side of me, and I realized that they were now replacing my pillows. "What time is it and where are we?" I asked. "About 1:30. "And where are we?" "Still at the airfield." "What happened to the 5th tank?" "A direct hit. The tank caught fire in seconds. There were no survivors. I got a nausea in my stomach." "How did that happen?" "It was an 88 caliber anti-aircraft gun. But we did our part. Mission accomplished. We're ready to return to the lead patrol." "How many tanks did we lose?" "Only 2, ours and the 5th. We've devastated the entire airfield, according to the map. There's not a single surviving building, airplane or other vehicle. Those Russians who survived have hidden deep in the woods. The fire has died out almost everywhere. Small pockets remain, but they are not dangerous." "I see," I replied. "Back to the head patrol." 3 tanks, having passed through the field to the gate, came to the road. At the first turn, nothing prevented us, and we moved at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour. The rain had stopped, and by noon the sky was finally clear, so visibility was clear. I felt great. The guys injected me with morphine, treated and bandaged my wound. It turned out that my back had been torn apart by small pieces of shrapnel, and one of them had gone through my ribs and lodged in my left lung. I could feel it, and it felt like it was the size of an apple, though it was actually 1.5 inches long. My uniform was soaked with blood, though there was no internal bleeding, and being under the influence of the morphine shot, I knew I could hold out for quite some time. The guys wouldn't let me move or talk, and every time the tank tipped a little, they propped me up with their feet. I was in a state where I didn't have to worry about anything. We had accomplished our task, and at that moment the war was over for us. From that moment on, we were free to sail. It remained to wait for the column of tanks Das Reich and victoriously go to Germany, home. I had already made plans and saw myself surrounded by charming nurses, tenderly caring for me and accompanying me on long walks in the park. I was already imagining myself as a war veteran, wearing a tunic covered with orders and medals, and picturing the looks of women who looked back at me with delight. I couldn't have dreamed of this before. I am a war hero. Suddenly the tanks stopped and stood at a close distance from each other. The commander of the first tank jumped out and ran up to me. This brought me back to reality. "Looks like we're in trouble, Captain. We're only 1/2 kilometer away from the turn where we directed those tanks when we wanted to confuse the Russians, but there are at least 100 people moving randomly ahead, as well as several tanks with their muzzles raised." "Got it. Help me get out of this tank and warn all our men. We can't let anyone get on top of that tank. I'll go back to the first tank." Pushing off with my hands and trying to raise myself up a little, I, to my horror, realized that I could not raise even a couple of centimeters. I swore and cursed as the guys carried me, very carefully, down to the seat. "Close all the hatches, except this one," I told them, "and don't open any. You must be ready every minute for any turn of events. Stay 100 meters apart from each other, so that if one of you gets into trouble, the other can fire machine gun fire, keeping the road under control." Now we were in constant contact with Germany. "If I stop, you must take cover under the trees, but remember to keep your distance relative to each other. Any questions? Let's go." My tank was moving forward. It was risky to head toward the crowd, but there was no other way to find out what the crowd was up ahead. As I got closer, in the middle of the road, I saw a Russian colonel who made a sign for me to stop. I was still wearing the uniform of a Russian colonel, which undoubtedly gave me some authority, and the visor of my cap pulled low down over my face, and the headphones so changed my appearance that no one could have accurately determined my age. Everyone else on the road, except the colonel, seemed to ignore us. I stopped the tank in front of the colonel, shutting off the engine. Without turning around, I knew the guys were ready to shoot anyone who tried to harm us right away. The colonel yelled loudly for me to go faster, but I answered, "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I'm wounded." He was instantly beside me, excitedly asking if I needed help, but I waved my hand aside. "I have a shrapnel wound, and some of the shrapnel is lodged in my lung, but that can wait. There's a more important thing. I've been ordered to block the way for the Germans who have broken through to this highway." "They've broken through to the highway!" he almost shouted. "Yes, these bastards are climbing into every crevice. Where, it seemed, and pass could not pass. The front is gone. Dogs. They disguised themselves as Russians and took advantage of our tanks. And how skillfully. They managed to confuse and drive 2 columns of our tanks into the swamps, and to make things worse, they also blew up the bridge. If we don't get them out of here as soon as possible, we can consider the war lost." Just now I received 2 anti-tank machine guns and set them on the edge of the forest. But how can you resist with these a large group of Germans? First of all, I thought to deceive them. Down by the river, if you go in the direction of Odessa, there is a state farm. So, I thought, I could hide the machine guns in a pine forest. When ours realized that they were going the wrong way, they went through the swamps to the farm. It stands along the bank, and in that place the river is shallow. But when they reached it, they saw that because of the rain the water level in the river had risen, and the tanks could not cross it. But as if the devil himself wants it, while ours were waiting, the Germans found a shallow place on the opposite side and crossed on 3 tanks, which, as you can see, they had well hidden. Our idiots then decided to leave, trying to cross the river lined up 2 tanks in a row, and of course the Germans just plain smashed them to smithereens. He cursed, and then continued. Now 2 tanks completely blocked the river. There is no other way out. Some of our fighting vehicles tried to sneak along the shoreline on the other side, but perhaps because of the embankment there is nothing to see, and the Germans, on the contrary, excellent visibility, and one precise blow is enough to undermine ours. We can't help from here either, as it is an open field, and they will see at once if we start to approach. We have already sent 3 squads of infantrymen there. They have surrounded the Germans and are lying there in front of their tanks. But now you have 3 tanks, and you can try to go on the offensive and maybe at least confuse them to clear the road, and ours will then try to cross. I could have listened to him all day long. What he was telling me warmed my soul, and I thought of what an irreplaceable brain Lithorst had. I could hardly restrain myself from laughing in the colonel's face. When he finished speaking, I pretended to be thoughtful, and a few seconds later I asked, "Where exactly are those machine guns you mentioned and roughly your infantrymen surrounding the tanks?" "Follow me and I'll show you where the guns are. They're very securely hidden. Infantry lies about 300 meters from the tanks on the other side of the forest. They are arranged in the shape of a crescent. By the way, I can allocate more men from the infantry to follow your tanks." "No need," I told him thoughtfully. "We will go at high speed, and I think they can not help us in this case. They'll only waste their time. You'd better show us where the guns are, and we'll set off at once." Apparently the colonel was not too concerned, because he did not even notice his mistakes. He ordered the commanders of the infantry squads to gather their men and follow the tanks. I watched him from under the visor of my cap. "Drive, follow us, and we'll give you a light," I thought. The colonel jumped into the car and turned to where the machine guns were hiding. We followed him, and behind us were the infantry, stretching out in ranks. There seemed to be several thousand of them. I informed the guys to take the 2 machine guns as soon as they saw them, and then described the location of the infantrymen surrounding our tanks. Somewhat unexpectedly, we found ourselves in position. Indeed, the machine guns were perfectly camouflaged in the woods, and there would be no trace of our tanks. From here we had a marvellous view of the river. We would not have noticed them if they had not been shown to us. 12 o'clock. 2 machine guns, I said to my guys. "Got it? Then don't miss. Open fire. 3 tanks and 2 machine guns in unison began firing into the air, turning everything upside down. The colonel was thrown as if on a springboard, and he flew into the moss and then crawled, trying to hide behind a tree. Now he realized his mistake for sure. I chortled at the thought of how he must have swore and cursed himself. The infantry that had followed us scattered. Those in the front row didn't even manage to fall to the ground under the incessant fire. Although some of them were lucky enough to escape into the woods, they were screaming for their lives as they made their way back to the main road. No amount of force would stop them now. Nevertheless, we did not care about them. We wanted to come to the aid of Horst's party as soon as possible. I almost immediately forgot about the colonel, who was trembling like a leaf behind a tree, but one of the boys pointed a cannon at his car and banged on it. The car was on fire at the same minute. Then I took out a rocket launcher and fired a salvo of green into the air, which meant that we were coming. "Clear the road. We are our own." A few seconds later, a return volley rang out over the riverbank. I could only imagine the relief they must have felt upon hearing of our approach. We began circling the field at 50 kilometers per hour, rousing the infantrymen, who scattered in all directions. 2 other tanks covered me as I made my way to the centre. Our opponents jumped like frightened hares, and all over the field was a crowd of retreating figures in a sprint. We were like 3 wolves that had disturbed a flock of sheep. "Don't shoot," I said to my crew. "We'll need them alive, as prisoners. Every one of them is worth more than an escaped cattle stall. We should outrun them and stand a few meters in front of them. Whoever tries to escape into the woods or run toward the river will be shot, and our 4th tank at full speed will move on them from the other side, and thus it will turn out that they are surrounded." In a few minutes we gathered them into one general mass, forcing them to raise their hands above their heads. Lieutenant Schmidt asked over the radio, "Do we shoot them?" "No, we can spread them out in that valley over there," I quickly replied. 2 men are enough to keep them under control." We walked leisurely around the prisoners, keeping our guns at the ready, but none of the Russians thought of escaping. They seemed even glad to be captured, as long as they did not have to fight, risking their lives under bullets. There were over 800 of them, and they were already making themselves comfortable on the grass, talking, laughing, and playing cards. After the counterattack aimed at Horst's tanks, at least 400 of them had died. It was hard to speculate. What if given the freedom to choose whether they would run or not? For many reasons, for the Russians to remain prisoners was the best of possibilities. But even though the danger from this side had passed, Horst still doubted absolute victory. Help could come to the Russians from the other side. The colonel, whom I pitied and did not kill, must have gathered courage and was ready to fight again. Apparently he had already sent a detachment of field artillery at us, retreating from the front. Barely seeing him, I quickly sent the 2 tanks around the bend, where they could lurk in the woods for a while. But this time the Russians did not hesitate long. They immediately saw the tanks moving away and opened fire on them. I saw a shell hit the left tank, but it could be compared to an egg breaking against a concrete wall. The tank didn't even twitch, and the guys only increased their speed. The moment had come for the Russians. It was now or never. But our crew started shooting back, and the attackers had to retreat. In the meantime, I kept trying to contact ours. First, help is needed, but all my efforts were in vain because the head sentinel was still too far away. I did not give up hope of getting an answer, but then Horst suddenly intervened, laughing wildly. "Captain, have you decided to have a real hare hunt? We didn't have time to watch for long, but what we saw was unforgettable. I'm about to burst out laughing." He changed his tone abruptly. At one point, being here, I was getting a little worried, even though we had defeated 7 tanks and had no casualties by then. We were patrolling along the coast, guarding our equipment as we don't have enough of it. Fortunately, Willie sent a motorcyclist who immediately went after the Russian columns. When he came back, he reported that they had realized that they had reached a dead end and were now heading back at full speed. To find out what their plans were, he rode ahead of them on the road at a distance of 2 kilometers, and realized that perhaps they were trying to re-establish communication, since the first tank had a long antenna mounted on it, which apparently catches over long distances. In any case, they suspected a hoax pretty quickly. My driver followed them like a kite. Their commander apparently decided to surprise us by breaking our resistance and then quietly continue on their way to their destination. As soon as they got off on a country road and set a course for Odessa, my driver flew here again and began to tell me with horror that they were now moving at a slightly different angle, about 45 degrees from the bridge, perhaps 3 to 5 kilometers south of our location. After this information, I got all the tanks together and decided to go down and drive along the course of the river, being sure that the state farm was there. The road there was sprinkled with gravel. It would have been better to drive on it in a horse-drawn cart. I was almost certain that this was the place where they would try to pass. Having positioned the tanks, I told all the locals to gather the most necessary things and set off for Odessa on foot, so that none of them could tell of our presence. I was lucky because these fools, like a herd of sheep, drove past the state farm without stopping and swam down the river, breaking into 2 rows. After waiting for them to swim away a little, we started firing. Some of the tanks caught fire at once. A few accurate shots were enough to make the ones trying to get back to the bank stop. On the other bank they tried to find another way out, but there was none. And having travelled 15 kilometres, they would not have come to another trail, even if they tried very hard. They would have only wasted fuel. Everything was going great for us, but my whole back was wet with sweat until you showed up. 2 Russian machine gunners fought to the last man. If it hadn't been for the barrier on the beach, we wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes, so when you showed up, we cheered up. At that moment, we didn't see a single tank on the other side. "Horst," I said, "I have a whole squad of 800 men for you. These are Russian prisoners. They're in the field. Look after them well. I can't talk much. I'm wounded in the lung and my mouth is bleeding. The sight of it is killing me. I'll try to get to the head watch, but I haven't been able to contact them for hours. Did you leave any tracks along the river? Can I get to the watch by any sign of them?" Horst didn't answer right away, so I was already guessing what he might say. It would be very dangerous. A great risk. From here to the other bridge we have already covered our tracks, but the Bolsheviks may be sitting on the embankment, on the bank, and as soon as you appear, they may jump on your tank. There seem to be thousands of them there now, because the sounds of heavy artillery can be heard constantly from the head sentinel. The Russians have discovered and eliminated our telephone line, so there's no communication, naturally. Although they have not succeeded in encircling us, that doesn't tell us anything. If we didn't have to keep the tanks in the swamps, we wouldn't even need bullets. We could crush their infantry with a single cannon hit. "Make contact with my other 2 tanks. They're on the road, fighting off the military the colonel sent after them." "How many tanks do you have?" I asked. "The ones you left, and Willie sent 3 more this morning, as well as 2 armoured cars, but they are of no use here. The guns that are on them are too weak to penetrate a tank." "All right, then send them up the road to my guys. They could use some support in a fight with artillery and infantry. Now we'll try to stop the retreating Russians on the main road and try to distract them. Naturally, they'll counterattack, but it's either us or them." We had barely had time to speak before 2 armoured cars rolled off in the direction of the road. I began to leave tracks leading toward the head sentinel, tugging at the same spot. It was risky on the riverbank and impossible on the road, so we opted for the embankment. I felt that the pain was becoming more and more intolerable, and badly needed a second shot of morphine. I told the tank to stop and turn off the engine for a while our machine gunner Dieter injected me with a needle. Its point stabbed me painfully. Naturally, the guys were not experts in this field. When I heard a noise, I ordered the car to start. The sounds that came from it were like the sounds of moving tanks. If we hadn't turned off the engine, we might not have heard anything. And then we saw that they were indeed tanks crawling, 2 in a row. They were moving along a narrow strip of road running parallel along the forest. They were not more than a kilometre away, but they had not yet noticed us, as we were not moving. Immediately I instructed the liaison to make contact with them, because if they were Germans they would hear us, as they were on the same wave. First, I said in German. Are you from our second motor pool? If not, I'll shoot. There was no reply. I tried again and again to get a connection until the last tank was at a distance of 250 meters from us. Let's go, quickly, I said to the guys. There was no point in letting them get too far away. Dieter was already on their tail and joined the column. The first salvo was fired, and one tank was finished. The other tank, turning to the left, ran at great speed into the forest. I heard Dieter cursing through his teeth after the second hit. Damn, gone! But the tank suddenly started to turn, and it swerved from side to side. No, it can't be. You hit it to the right, and now it can't move straight. Dieter took aim again, and this time hit the bullseye. The tank jumped up and caught fire. The Russians didn't realize what was happening. Nevertheless, they kept moving, not realizing where the German tank could have come from. It was not safe for them to continue on this side. I had no doubt that the second tank had time before it was hit to send a message, which meant that the Russians would try to avoid this road. However, they didn't have many alternate routes. We turned off the engine again and listened. We heard the rumbling wheels of trucks and cars of various models, but no tanks. So I decided to try my luck again and still contact Willie. To my complete surprise, Willie answered me after the first attempt. The connection with him was excellent. You all right, old fox? Where are you? I just hit 2 T-36s. They were heading towards where our guys might be. Those dogs. Since you left, we've had a good fight with them around here. Thank God we have enough ammunition. They surrounded us, but they didn't have tanks, so they couldn't get close. I'm not worried about the tank brigade on the other side of the river. They have absolutely no chance of getting to that side, but they're firing bullets at us with rifles. It's so ridiculous, you can't imagine. These devils have set up on the road all the weapons they can, everything they managed to bring back with them from the front, artillery cannons, grenade launchers. The infantry is moving by the thousands. They're trying their best to save their tanks. I even saw trucks with wooden sides on the bridge. A little farther from the bridge, I put a tank on each side of the road, and the other 4 tanks were surrounded by infantry. They lay down around in a crescent shape. If you give them even the slightest chance, they will instantly climb on the tanks. To let our Air Force know, I spread 4 flags on the ground. Even though they're only flying over the road right now, it's still a huge boost for us. They haven't spotted us by the river yet, but every so often I try to catch a connection on our wave. 1 minute, Georg, one is just flying. Let's try together. Maybe one of us will get lucky this time. We both started looking for a connection. Eric, come in. We're at the siege field. We heard his reply clearly. The siege field? Over. Where are you? As he circled over the main road, firing, we transmitted the coordinates of our location. I'm speaking to the commander of the airplane, I said. We are surrounded on the river. The enemy took a position in the shape of a crescent moon. Approximately 50 tanks driven into the swampy terrain on the other side of the river, all of them in full combat readiness. Another group, about 7 kilometers south of here, is positioned along the river. Another brigade of Russian tanks is also there, taking heavy fire from both sides and so far holding steady. Clear a path for us. Understood, but I have to get back to base. The plane turned toward the north and disappeared. Willie, I called out. How did you do it, you sly skunk? But my voice began to break, and I coughed and wheezed and bled again. What's the matter, Georg? Are you hurt? There was no point in trying to trick him, so I ordered him to stay on the line until I felt better. As soon as I could, I went right back to talking, but now I spoke quite quietly, trying to breathe as little as possible. I had a small piece of metal lodged in my left lung, but it was no big deal. It's just time for another shot of morphine. You hang in there, old man. Just a little more and it'll be over. I'll try. You stay on the same frequency and I'll try to get back to the boys. Maybe this time we can stay in touch. Very slowly and carefully we turned back and drove along the river to the bridge. Once in the field, we were again visible from the big road, and as soon as we appeared, the Bolsheviks opened fire with all the guns they had. And where had that damned colonel gotten all those anti-tank guns? Cussing, I gave the command to turn back. Bullets were raining down on us from everywhere. The firing didn't stop until we were out of sight. "We're clear," I said to my crew. "Let's turn around completely and get away at speed. We have to try to fool them into thinking we're heading toward the head sentinel. We disappear now, turn around again and run towards the embankment." As soon as we were out of sight, I ordered the tank to stop. "We'll reach the edge of the embankment, then drive along it for about half a kilometre and again flicker along the road. Only the speed should be furious and even more, because we need to have time to skip the field and go into the forest. I had a rocket launcher ready in case both our tanks are nearby or the guys on the river decide to let us know about themselves. They might not recognize us and open fire, mistaking us for Russians. I made a quick call to them on the comms when we were ready to go. "Are you still in control of the turn-off? We'll be passing through in a moment." "No, Captain." "What?" I yelled. "Then where the hell are you?" It was dangerous to stay here. The Russians had pulled up too many anti-tank weapons, so we left the place a few minutes ago. We didn't have the option of retreating back along the road to the bridge or into the field because they could intercept us. So we picked a trail running along the edge of the woods parallel to the highway and are now heading towards the head sentry. The Russians aren't sure where we are. You idiots! Fools! Did it not occur to you that right now the Russians should be scouring the fields, forests and roads to prevent us from reaching Horst? You think the forest will protect you, but it also provides cover for the Russians who can track you down. Even if you tried hard enough, you couldn't think of anything stupider. I sent you to cover Horst, and all you're doing is trying to protect yourselves. All right, I'm on my way. I'm territorially across from you now, near the embankment, so when you see me, you'll have to help me. I gave my crew the command to move off. Our speed at that moment fluctuated between 50 and 60 kilometers per hour, and we sped down the stretch in a minute and a half, so that the Russians did not even have time to activate their guns. At least, that's what I hoped. We were bouncing up and down as we raced across the field, and the Russian machine guns were coming right at us. Judging by the number of shells flying and exploding behind and ahead of us, there were at least 50 of them. I could see the bullets hitting the ground as they flew past us, and I could feel the shrapnel crashing into the tank before gently flying off into the grass. If we didn't know we were driving on the ground, we couldn't tell for sure because it felt like the devil himself was looking us in the eye. I was euphoric and therefore had no fear. Being halfway down the trail, I fired a green volley, praying to God that Horst and his guys would notice it. The woods grew thicker and the barrage of the Russians heavier. Their shells flew powerfully, exploding in the woods as far as they could. They flew low, and sooner or later one of them was bound to blow us up. But so far they were either not getting there or, on the contrary, were flying too high. And then we reached the middle of the forest and, slowing down, headed for our tanks. The smoke was fantastic. The trees seemed to disappear. I was finally able to catch my breath and make contact with the guys. "It's all right, guys," I told them. "Now we are going to get their weapons, which are on the road, and whatever we find. We can't go slow or they'll shoot us like chickens, one by one. Stretch out through the woods and wait for my orders." The tanks, manoeuvring among the trees, positioned themselves at a distance of 20 meters from each other and waited for me. We had no time to lose, but first I had to contact Willie and Horst. If Horst had even a partial change in location, it could drastically affect our plans. I received a reply immediately. "How do you intend to proceed?" I asked. 200 meters from the main road through the forest. I have tanks and armoured vehicles. We are 1 kilometre north of the bend. I heard him whistling. "Yes," I said. "You're right. We're about to make contact with our planes now. If they show up, you'll have excellent support." "The planes are already here," Horst said. "There are 3 of them. They've been on the other side for 20 minutes, giving the Russians hell. You know, I saw with my own eyes how the explosion of a dropped bomb threw a tank 5 meters into the air and overturned. Well, Horst, I doubted. You made a mistake. Perhaps you meant to say 500 meters. That was something. It was fantastic, he shouted excitedly. If you had seen it, a somersault without touching the ground. After that, the Russians have quieted down, but they are still trying to fight back. They are sneaking along the river, but we, with the engines off, perfectly hear the noise of their engines and, when the tank passes in half a kilometre, blow it up, so that they do not even have time to remember. Keep watching, Horst. They may find another way out. Impossible. I've checked the entire surrounding area. Good. And I want to deal with the Colonel's men. They're getting a little too loose. I need to calm them down a bit. I disconnected and got back in touch with Willie. The reception was great. I'm still hunting hares, Georg, he shouted. Those lousy infantry are all over everything. It's like a whole field of ants. I used your tactics and sent 3 tanks at once at great speed to drive them back into the forest. I haven't had this much fun in a long time, not since I was a 6-year-old kid chasing big frogs on a pond. We'd chased them back to the main road to begin with, but maybe that's what they wanted, to trap us. Thinking about it, I immediately decided to take my old position. We're fooling around now, you might say. Willie, I've got some unresolved business here with the Russian colonel. I let him live, but he doesn't seem to appreciate kindness. If I didn't know you so well, I'd call you a complete idiot, because if I were you, I'd rather blow the head off one colonel than 100 infantrymen. A flock of sheep without a shepherd is going to get lost somewhere. Grind him to powder, why not? That'll be our code. I'm back in touch with the tanks and armoured cars. Come in, I'm first, Fenrich Ole is second, Lieutenant Walter is third. Armoured cars, Fenrich Hans, fourth, and Albert, fifth. Is that clear? One by one the answers followed, all clear. The smoke from the fire caused by the last bombing had prevented the Russians from seeing us in the fog. But now they had installed a Katyusha, which was not easy to cope with. Katyusha hit with shells stuffed with ground pieces of metal, broken glass, electric bulbs, tin cans, clay, weeds, any object that could aggravate the explosion. As they flew out of the machine gun every second, they exploded in the air, scattering their contents in all directions. The sheer rumble from them could undermine the nervous system, not to mention the stab wounds and the potential to tear an unprotected man apart. But for tanks, they were still weak. There was a 1 in 1,000 chance that a Katyusha hit could set a tank on fire, so there was nothing to worry about. Second, third, fourth. Over, I was transmitting. Take a detour through the woods on the other side of the road until you are behind the colonel and his men, then get on the highway. 2, fire on the road, blow up anything that gets on it. Third, fourth, destroy everything along the edge of the forest. Also take on the infantry. When you move off, at a speed of at least 40 kilometres, until you reach the turn and the line where the guns are set up again. I want everything on both sides of the bridge and the main highway destroyed. Fifth, continue to follow slowly and carefully along the edge of the forest on the field side, but keep 100 metres behind the other 3 tanks. Drive slowly and destroy anything that gets in your way. If you see some machine guns, you must destroy them without waiting to be spotted. If you don't get there first, so help you God. I'll go in the open and try to draw them in by drawing attention to myself. Naturally, my guns won't be silent at that point. The rumble of gunfire will prevent them from hearing your approach, and then it will be too late. I'll wait 5 minutes and then move in. 2 tanks and armoured cars started their engines and barely audibly crawled, drowned out by the rumble of Katyusha. I sat down in the tank and waited, praying to God only that nothing would interfere with them. This time I had absolutely no guesses as to how our sortie might end. Now listen carefully, I said to my crew. Coming out of the forest into the open, we must manoeuvre as clearly as possible. We need to develop maximum speed, even above the limits, and every 100 metres we must make sharp zigzag turns. I do not care in what direction we will turn, but the tank must not go straight. You must make movements not expected by the enemy every 5 seconds. Who is at the site? He will not have to rest." I confidently sat down, checked if everything was in order with the headphones, and, gloomily looking in front of me, gave the command to move forward. We sped toward the field, avoiding trees and trying to maintain speed. At first we couldn't see anything because of the smoke, but then suddenly we were in an open field, right in the line of sight of the Russian machine guns. Joachim, my driver, shouted, "We are going at a speed of 55 kilometers." "Try 65 kilometers," I shouted back. 2 seconds later we made the first turn and opened fire on the left side, and immediately Russian cannon shells flew at us without stopping. We changed our trajectory relative to the river. Then we turned left again and raced back toward the turn. The colonel must have thought we had gone mad, or, more likely, were making a last desperate attempt to get away after coming under fire. The sheer spectacle from the outside looked reckless. Our actions had no logic. We made another sharp turn back towards the river. Turning left again, at an angle of 55 degrees, we dodged toward the woods, and then suddenly veered to the right, giving the Russians no chance to catch the target. They were on the verge of insanity themselves. I had a telescope through, which I watched them. Right at the edge of the road, they had set up 2 .78 caliber guns, well protected from direct hits, but with an excellent opportunity to shell the field. On the opposite side, among the trees, machine guns were clearly visible, in fairly large numbers. All that they had carefully camouflaged was now in front of me, and the weapons I noticed were quite sufficient. My eyes widened as I tried to count roughly how many cannon barrels were pointing in all directions. They were firing half blindly, sending shell after shell into a relentless bombardment, but hardly any of them hoped the target would be destroyed. However, Dieter was not behind them in anything, and also did not let the tank be silent for a moment. It seems that the main task for both the Russians and us was simply to shoot, and if there was a hit within 50 meters, it meant a very good result. Once again we jumped to the left, but this time we backed up sharply and then dashed forward, so as not to repeat ourselves and thus remain elusive. 5 seconds later, we were back on the right and turned again toward the river. The sky had turned into one solid glow. I saw the infantry, the riflemen, who were lying down to take aim, but at the same moment our machine gun fired a frantic burst at them. They dropped their rifles and rushed toward the road, disappearing from sight. I was laughing like a man on the verge of insanity, and so were the rest of the guys. We kept on darting, to the right, to the left, forward, backward, then at breakneck speed at the colonel's men, then dodging the blows. We were so carried away that before the next zigzag, the tank tilted, almost overturned. At times it seemed as if we had been hit, or the tank had lost control, and Joachim was leaving us on the enemy side. My stomach was turning over too, and the constant shaking made me feel that I was getting weak. I dared not even think what would happen to my lungs, and only excessive excitement kept me from losing consciousness. With a sharp turn, the tank bounced like it was about to take off. Dieter swore his last words. The gun barrel rose high up, and as Dieter prepared to fire in the right direction, we skidded again, and the shells flew with a wild howl over the heads of the Russians, into the crowns of trees, into the ground, and wherever else they could. We could only hope that the ground would turn faster, and we were about to see the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th crawling to our aid. The infantry began to group up against us again, and I ordered the driver to rush at speed in their direction. Otherwise they could surround our other tanks with grenades. "Go straight at them and drive 100 meters to the next turn," I shouted. Joachim did not answer. He had no time. Abruptly jerked the tank to the left. We almost toppled over, but with difficulty holding on, drove forward. Now our cannon was pointing where it should, and Dieter smiled. He could fire directly at the Russian gun emplacements. Our machine guns were cross-firing with the infantry, while Dieter directed all efforts to destroy the enemy's guns. We were thrown violently to the right, then back and again to the right, and we rushed across the field. But suddenly Joachim completely lost control of the tank, and we were carried closer and closer to the infantry. We were about 300 meters away from them, and we were still advancing. The Russians were mad, not realizing what was happening. They were literally flying in different directions, throwing their rifles and machine guns. Then I felt a strong jolt at the turn and saw that the Russians were running parallel to use. Thank God, the driver managed to straighten the situation, and we rushed back across the field to safety. But our unexpected rush had its effect. The walled-in Russians gave up their positions and disappeared into the woods, and I was sure that a good half of them had fled for good. Suddenly, I saw our second tank, but it was moving in the opposite direction to the one in which it was supposed to move, so the colonel wasn't as stupid as we'd hoped. He must have put some of the men who ran away from us to defend against the tanks. It's hard to describe the smoke on the road from the firefight between our two tanks and the Russians. For me, it was time to do my duty. Ordering Joachim to turn 180 degrees to the south, I opened the hatch cover and stuck my head out so that I could see everything that was going on. The Russians were totally confused and didn't understand what we were racing across the field for. We weren't advancing or retreating, we were just playing cat and mouse with them like children at a Sunday picnic. The infantry and the machine gunners, who were still here, were just standing around, waiting to see what we'd come up with next. And I hoped they'd run away like they had before, dropping their guns and ammunition. We advanced on them until we were just opposite our second tank. Then I saw an armoured truck and a fourth tank just as it fired a succession of volleys. We were now completely surrounded by Russian machine guns, and Dieter was constantly turning the barrel left and right, firing without stopping. The second one returned to the main road, and the three tanks drove together behind each other, continuing to crossfire with the Russians. We moved down toward the turn, and gradually the rumble of the guns became quieter and quieter. The enemy did not have enough strength to penetrate the tank. Long columns retreating from the front were turning into the forest for at least half a kilometre to go around us. The road from north to south and to Odessa was now completely blocked to us, and all that remained was a path across the bridge. Cars and trees were burning, smoke and soot were everywhere, and the infantry were fleeing headlong to the sea, hoping that there at least they could avoid being burned alive. From where we were, I could see the colonel, at a distance of 300 yards, standing in the middle, his arms wide open, trying to stop the retreating infantry who had abandoned their guns. But none of them cared. This small part of Russia no longer interested them. The colonel called and waved in vain. No one wanted to hear him. We ourselves did not know whether we had won, or, on the contrary, lost the battle. The fifth never showed up, and I was almost 100% sure that he was undermined. If the colonel had managed to collect or recover men and guns, we would be in trouble. We were too close, and instead of 5, we only had 3 tanks. I stared at him intently. I could have taken him out with one blow, but I caught myself that in this case I respected the Russian standing in front of me, and no force on earth would make me commit murder. This man was not afraid of us. It was a real man. The other one's on the line. Captain, we are moving away from machine gun fire. Roger that. It was getting harder and harder for me to think. I was in pain and mentally exhausted. All I wanted was to get the hell out of Russia, out of Odessa, forget everything connected with them, just lie down on a comfortable soft bed and sleep. Did we win or not? And when will the guys from Das Reich come to our rescue? If they don't show up soon, then none of us will be left alive. I leaned against the wall of the tank and asked Dieter how many shells were left. 10, and that's all, he replied. The third was also running out of ammunition. It was unacceptable for any of us to stay here any longer. Third? Third, I said. Together we turn right. It's now or never. I'll go first, shooting from the right, and you follow behind at 20 meters and keep the left side in your sights. Save the last shot for yourself. The 2nd will go back into the woods and try to find out what happened to the 5th, and then head across the field to Horst at top speed. We drove on. The colonel was still standing in the middle, unmoving and only waving his fists. The unfortunate man didn't even have a gun in his hand. All the time we were advancing among them, the Russians were afraid to fire for fear of hitting each other, so instead of repelling the attack, they simply ran off the road and lost themselves in the bushes. But not the colonel. Our tank was slowly closing in on him, but he didn't even move. Alone on the deserted road, he waited for the inevitable moment when our tank would run him over. I had never felt this way about Russians before. We turned just in front of him and drove past to the road leading over the bridge. I didn't turn around, but I knew he was still standing there. As soon as we turned, Ditta turned the muzzle and fired one last volley. Then at high speed we rolled toward the river. At least we'd blocked the road, done some damage, and the Russians would have to spend an extra hour, if not more, to restore things to the way they were. I just hoped that by then they'd come to our aid. The next thing required was to break up the ranks of the infantrymen, who had rebuilt again. But we didn't expend much effort on that. They spread out in the shape of a rainbow to the southwest, but this time not in a single row. They again, like ants, spread across the field and lay everywhere. Our lower machine gun still had a whole clip and was slashing at the soldiers without stopping. Then, to our right, we found an anti-tank gun turned toward the river. Since it was not firing, they must have mistaken us for Russians. Swearing at the last shell we had to use, we shot the military men near the gun. Third, I asked. Do you still have a grenade? I do, as ordered. Then destroy that damn machine gun, so it's no more. The 2nd tank still did not show out of the forest, so I decided to get in touch. They responded immediately. The armoured vehicle is engulfed in flames, Captain. I'm on my way back and heading back to the river now. It was bad news. They must have been blown up from the tanks ahead of them, or fired on by machine gun fire they didn't see. Maybe the guys got out and escaped. Maybe they did. But if even a quarter of the Russians who lay in a semicircle turned out to be of the same character as the colonel, then they'd eat us all up with tanks and guns combined. I fired a green rocket and got a reply from Horst. The fire in the enemy camp had died down, but on the west side of the river we were still being shelled, but to no avail. I turned to look through the binoculars to see what was happening on the main road. Damn colonel. I was beginning to regret not slapping him. He'd managed to rally the soldiers again. Wave after wave of infantrymen came out of the woods. I could imagine what Willie would think of me if he were here, but I was in excruciating pain and didn't have the strength not to kill anyone, just to think about it. That colonel, damn him, was doing everything he could to keep us out. I didn't know how much I'd managed to fool him, but he now realized we were out of ammunition. I could see the burning trucks rolling down the road. It looked like the colonel was going to bring in heavy artillery, and if he could get a single battery of heavy weapons, they would crush us on the spot. But then I thought of the airplanes. Of course, they should be back any minute. Without them, we'd be in a world of hurt. Our tank headed for where Horst was. How are you? How's it going? Fine. We broke through the infantry without a problem, but when we got into the woods, we ran into their anti-tank gun. We wouldn't have made it through, so I decided to outsmart the damn colonel and sent 2 tanks and an armoured car at high speed to crush everything in their path to divert their attention, and in the meantime I drove safely out of the field. I saw this picture. What a laugh it was. The Russians must have used up half of Odessa's ammunition. The sky was shining like a fairy tale while you were dancing under it. Yeah, it was fun. By the way, what's new with you? We have quite enough opportunities to hold the tank brigade while it's light, but you'd better not ask what might happen when night falls. I think it will be impossible. I've set up posts between the tanks so the infantry won't sneak in. I take it that our only hope remains in the airplanes, which should show up here before dark. Horst nodded. What would happen otherwise, we were both well aware. Neither of us could allow even the thought of being caught by the Russians, especially now. I thought of our years of training. God only knew whether there would be anything left of the 115th Division, or whether here in Odessa we would all be finished, with the troops belonging to the Führer himself. 3 years of the hardest training, all for the sake of there being no trace of us left in just a few days. I looked ahead, onto the main road. Not a single gunshot rang out at that moment, only the screams of people running in panic. I saw a few tractors, or maybe even tanks. I couldn't tell for sure. It was too far away, and the tall grass was in the way. They were turning into the woods, in our direction, and I didn't like it at all. I didn't like this strange lull. "I hope you have some ammunition left," I said to Horst. "If you count roughly, about 120 to 130 charges in each tank. At least it should be enough for a while. Tell them to give us 20 to 25 shells from each tank. We've used up the entire reserve completely. I could not remember how long it had been since my men and myself had eaten, though I was more thirsty than anything else in the world, and we had a river of water. Horst, is there anything edible in this place?" "Sorry, but we haven't eaten anything since last night." I dismissed all thoughts of food and my men being hungry and looked out into the forest, but Horst kept talking. "The Russians on the other side of the river slaughtered a pig on a farm and hung it up to drain the blood. But it's the Russians, not us." "Yes," he hummed, "but it's very simple. 3 men are on their way to get that little piglet." "What?" I shouted. 3 men against a whole troop? No, the Russians themselves are hiding in gardens and trees as the planes bomb periodically and level buildings and everything around them. You see, there's a pig hanging from a tree right now, and I've ordered 2 tanks to cover the guys once they're on the other side of the river. I shook my head. "We can't take any more casualties, Horst." "I know, but we have 2 or 3 men alternating patrols all day long. The Russians won't dare to come any closer now." Hardly had he finished speaking when a tank and machine guns opened fire on the main area of the farm, on the other side. These assholes are risking their lives for a piece of pork. "Let's drive 50 meters along the embankment and see what's there," Horst told me. I sighed loudly as the tank moved off. From the bank we had a good view of the burned-out farm and the 3 soldiers. They were calmly walking among the ruins, not even bothering to hurry up. The Russians would hardly risk giving away their position because of 3 men. This trio was just lucky. Looking to my right, I saw that the others were already building a fire and trimming branches to make skewers for kebabs. At first I smiled, and then I burst out laughing. There was not a shadow of doubt on their faces that they would get what they wanted. Then my laughter turned to coughing. I looked back. The guys had gotten the pig and were walking back, almost at a strolling pace. All they lacked was a flag to carry proudly in front of them. "Okay, Horst," I said. "I give up." Not 5 minutes later, the pig was cut into pieces, and everyone held their improvised skewer over the fire, turning it so that the meat was cooked through. So far the main road was quiet. Half the guys couldn't wait to finally get their portion ready. We hadn't had kebabs in over 4 years. That was the reason they were so impatient. They even pounced on half-raw meat. I couldn't even eat a bite. I couldn't even stand the smell, so I sat aside on the riverbank, watching the others with envy and feeling nauseous at the same time. I also listened to the sounds coming from the forest, but so far I heard nothing but bird song. Waiting until Horst had finished, I beckoned to him. "Listen, I want no one to lose vigilance because this suspicious silence may be one of the Russian tricks," I told him. "They can only get to us through the infantry, and you know it's as if the devils are helping them. They can lie in ambush for hours, advancing a few meters, and then before you know it, in a matter of moments, there will be nothing left of us. Now I will go with 3 tanks to find a place from where it will be most convenient to cover you." Horst withdrew to organize people, and I explained to the guys in the tanks that we need to choose a safe place somewhere in the bushes. After driving about 400 meters off the main road, we stopped in a well-hidden clearing. For the next half an hour there were no alarm signals from the Russians. I decided to contact Wheelie. "Hello, Georg," he said. "We have a hell of a situation here. The tanks on the other side of the river can't do us much harm, but now the Russians have brought up heavy artillery, anti-tank guns and a few more tanks. For the last half hour, or maybe more, we have no time to catch our breath. They are not surrendering, and it seems that their attempts are not unsuccessful. Immediately after the conversation, the second and third took turns on the line. "Can you see what's happening in front of your nose?" I immediately grabbed my binoculars and began to stare intently into the distance. What I saw, to put it mildly, did not make me happy. At least 3 squads of infantrymen were advancing on us, stretched out in 6 long rows. This was no fun at all, and I immediately turned to Horst. "Send another tank to our left flank, order him to take up a position 200 meters away, and if you have such an opportunity, another one would be very useful to us on the right. You yourself be ready to repel the attack, and don't take your men off their posts. They may try to get in from both sides at the same time." The colonel had organised his offensive in a first-class manner. Hardly had we finished talking to Horst when we found ourselves under heavy artillery fire. The Russians were on the offensive, trying to find out our location, but we were not going to be provoked and continued to wait in silence without returning fire. Then the colonel again connected the Katyusha, acting on our nerves, hoping for reckless actions on our part, but still the explosions of its shells could not harm us. I paid no attention to this and continued to watch the infantry. At the moment it was the only thing to pay attention to. Then a huge tank, Joseph Stalin, appeared on our right. This hulk had no doubts about its strength, and so it moved slowly and purposefully in our direction, like Goliath looking for David, ready to bury us underneath it. So far the Joseph Stalin was too far away for my guns to be effective against it, but that didn't apply to its cannon. The tank was something like a nonchalantly sailing warship, and the only disadvantage, when it was moving on a small road, could be considered its size. Horst was on the right flank, and his whistle reached me. "Georg, do you see what I see? There's a whole fortress coming at us. For God's sake, don't give away your position," I hissed. "We will direct the guns at him at once, all 3 tanks, but first we need to let him come up at least 500 meters. Stalin inexorably continued to approach, slowly, self-confidently, and not going to stop for anything. The barrels of its guns were aimed at the bushes where we were hiding, saved only by the fact that those sitting in it did not yet know that we were here. I grimaced as the tank aimed its centre cannon practically at my nose. The artillery stopped firing, and there was silence for a moment. Apparently infantry has approached and they're letting it pass, I thought. As soon as this thought flashed through my mind, they rushed forward as if on command, shouting, whistling, bayoneted and ready to stab us. If they succeeded in encircling the tanks, we would be torn to pieces. I quickly commanded my crew, "Don't fire until I give the command." The fleeing infantrymen were about 200 meters away from us, and Stalin, no more than a kilometer. Yes, the colonel undoubtedly acted competently. If we do not start shooting back within a few seconds, they will cover our tanks like ants. But if we open fire, Stalin, one blow, will destroy us after the first shot, not to mention the artillerymen of the colonel, huddled in the woods. Stalin had 3 guns and only needed to get a little closer. I gave orders to Horst and Second to aim at his weakest point, just below the turret with the barrels. Dieter did the same on our tank. We sat in suspense and waited. Stalin came quite close, and the infantrymen, running with roaring and whistling, were 100 meters away from us. We had no more than 5 seconds at our disposal. All 3 tanks were ready to crossfire at my command, but I waited, buying fractions of a second. The shouts and curses of the Russians came clearly to our ears. They were mad with rage and hatred. "Ready!" I shouted. "Fire!" The cannons struck the Stalin at once, and machine guns rumbled at the soldiers. The first 3 volleys knocked the tank off balance. The next 3 we fired on the caterpillar belt. Now at least he could not move, but still remained an impregnable fortress, ready to strike back with 3 barrels at once. I waited for the attack, watching our shells whizzing by, knowing there was nothing more we could do. We were like sitting ducks, and suddenly, like thunder, our airplane appeared and with a howl dropped a bomb on the tank. It hit the target, Stalin instantly burst into flames, and we dropped on the infantry all our arsenal. Those advancing in the front ranks fell like flies, but there was no need to shoot at them, because seeing that their main hope no longer existed, they stopped and, turning around, rushed into the forest. We immediately left cover, retreating at a high rate of speed, but never ceasing firing for a moment. I then gave the command to commence a game of hare hunting. We had to hold them for a long time, waiting for the men who would take custody of the 800 prisoners, and not one of the Russians tried to go back to the colonel's side. Probably they thought it was better to be captured but alive and join the others sitting on the grass, who didn't even need guards, than to fight against us. We didn't have time to see if they were still playing cards. "Well done, lads. Now, without slowing down, let's go straight ahead, destroying everything we can get our hands on," I shouted. Never before had I seen so many troops concentrated in such a small area as this field. 2,000 in a square of half a kilometre. They were fleeing into the woods faster than when they were advancing. As soon as we reached the open field, Russian tanks and anti-tank guns opened fire, and we were forced to take up our old position. Even so, my friend the colonel lost this battle. Now we could not fear pursuit, because the airplanes covered us from the air. 3 Messerschmitt bombed the Russians as soon as they noticed movement, but the anti-tank installations and the tanks themselves were so well camouflaged in the forest between trees and bushes that the planes could not detect and strike at them, why they and dealt only with the infantry. But that was enough at that point. I sent Horst with his 2 tanks back to the river, and myself stayed with my guys in the bushes to keep watch. As soon as the planes disappeared, the colonel, knowing our approximate location, began to practically plough the field, tearing out every bush and tree that blocked the view. Our tank drove up to one of the hollowed-out holes left by a burst shell, and we began to make a kind of trench, frantically turning the tank from right to left, back and forth, until only the gun barrel remained outside, and we ourselves were in a fortress dug in the ground. The other 2 tanks were still fairly securely sheltered among the trees. Finally, a sigh of relief escaped me, and I relaxed. Surely it was all behind me now. Not even the colonel would launch another counterattack now. The only thing he can do is to open artillery fire and launch his damn Katyusha again, the sound of which makes my eardrums burst. Pictures of our triumphant return flashed before my eyes. But the pleasant thoughts were interrupted by Horst, who called me insistently. "Georg, they're coming from the south. They have 2 more tanks." I groaned and swore at the same time. That's how they decided to outsmart us, and it almost worked. The 3rd, on the right flank, was further south than the others, so I ordered it to stay put and watch the main road to the east. The 2nd one I gave the assignment to withdraw with me and head to Horst's aid. We rushed down the embankment and found him half a kilometre from the river. By the time we arrived, the Russian infantry had already managed to surround him. They were everywhere, ready to jump on the tank with shouts and yells or throw grenades at it. Coming up from behind, we suddenly rushed at them, opening fire on the raiders, after which those who were unlucky and remained lying on the ground. Then, lined up in a row, we began to crush the Russians, firing guns and machine guns. Finding ourselves, literally, between 2 fires, our enemies had almost no chance to stay alive. We were constantly in touch with the 3rd, but this time his silence was too long. Suddenly Horst shouted, "I don't know what else we can do, or are we screwed?" Quickly turning my head, I saw that his tank was on fire. "Get to safety immediately," I commanded the others. Horst's tank could only be blown up by another, no less powerful than Stalin. Nothing else could be here. Inside me, everything turned upside down and ached. Horst was one of those who should not have been killed. Seeing that one tank had been lost, the infantry cheered up and came at us again, but we retaliated as hard as we could. Closing ranks tighter, we mercilessly shot the infantry. But even under our joint onslaught, they did not retreat, and wave after wave continued their movement, jumping over the dead. In rows, like columns of ants, they came at us without thinking of stopping, and when our fire reached the next row, they piled on top of the previous dead, forming a heap. God, I thought, this can't go on like this. This isn't war anymore, it's a massacre, a murder. But nothing stopped, and more piles of bodies continued to appear on the field. Why are they throwing themselves in the face of imminent death? I asked myself. Why do they not want to save themselves now, so that later they can try to fight an equal opponent, and if they die, then in a fair fight? Why does the colonel give his men to certain death? Why is he doing this? We didn't stop firing. Either they get us or we get them, but somebody's going to get killed. There's got to be an end to this at some point. The other 2 tanks made contact. In about 5 minutes we'll run out of ammo. I looked at the lines of infantrymen. There seemed to be no end to them. Quantity could outweigh quality. Move right behind me at 100 meters, I commanded, and give them as much lead as you can. I'll stay in position and you speed toward the river. Send 2 tanks here with full ammunition and you stay in their place. We moved forward, overturning the Russians and crushing them. At least now they were under control, albeit temporarily, but I didn't even want to think how long that would last. They were literally throwing themselves at the tank and finding themselves flattened on the ground. I waited, looking up into the sky and looking for air support, which hadn't yet arrived. Then I just stood in plain sight, being a perfect target for the Russians, challenging them to a duel, but for some reason they stopped dead in their tracks. Maybe they had exhausted all their options. In addition, they did not yet understand what our actions meant. First offensive, then retreating and moving forward again, then the disappearance of 2 tanks at once in the bushes, when only one remained in plain sight. I decided that if the colonel took any more action, it would be his last feat. Then, watching through binoculars, I saw that at a distance of 1 kilometre or 2 in the direction of Odessa, hundreds of people, trucks and in general on the road is feverish movement. A whole battalion of sappers was trying to rebuild a bridge. Perhaps this action on the road was to divert our attention from the real purpose, to build a temporary bridge for the passage of tank detachments, in the meantime to pin us here and wait for us to let our guard down. And what's more, they almost succeeded. Now I understood why there was not even an attempt to get through the patrols put out by Horst on the other side of the river, and not a single shot was fired when the boys were taking the pig. The Russian tanks weren't there at all at that point, and Horst's tank was blown up by one of the tanks across the river at very close range. It was a ruse. If their tanks went on the offensive now, it would mean that all our previous actions had been in vain, and all those soldiers had died for nothing. We had to do something. The river was contacted. What's more, I felt like I was talking to a ghost, because it was Horst. "Did you all manage to save yourselves?" I quickly asked. "Unfortunately, 1 is wounded, but 3 are fine." "Are the other tanks on their way to us?" "Not yet, but they are almost ready." "Good, stop them immediately. We can take care of ourselves here. We've got enough ammunition for the machine guns for a long time. The main thing I've just discovered is that they're trying to fool us. While you were setting up your posts and keeping an eye on where the supposed enemy is hiding, they didn't even have tanks there. They must have gotten away from there during the artillery barrage last time, because now they are very nicely positioned 3 kilometers south of you. And from my station, I can see the damn Russian sappers building a temporary bridge, so they should be there in a few hours. Listen, Horst, I'll back you up and drive the infantry back. Take 3 tanks and withdraw towards the main road, right along the edge of the forest. And when you get to the road, drive south at full speed. Drive straight ahead, and don't worry if you encounter infantry ahead, just push on without stopping. And don't stick to one trajectory, more wiggle. When you reach the forest, take a course directly to Odessa and drive in a southerly direction towards the city for about 3 kilometers, to the place where there should be a switchboard. When you get to the hill, I can see you. But don't go up, but follow the plain and, after going around the hill, come back after me. But for God's sake, Be careful as you move across the open ground, unless there are suitable thickets nearby for shelter. You're free to go. I'll give you the rest of the instructions on the way. Let's just hope we're not too late. When you get to the second largest hill, take the right, as there is more vegetation. Your main task is to remain undetected. You should approach 500 meters to the place where they are building the bridge. Don't show your face, don't go into the open. Aim exactly at the bridge and send one tank to hold the infantry. Destroy everything you can so the Russians can't get through. Good luck. I'll be watching you. My head was working hard. I switched to our other secret wave and started calling the bomber. Then I tried to contact Willie, saying that if he could hear me, then let him also try to signal the plane to take a course about 10 kilometers south of where they flew the previous time. 20 minutes had passed since the last time the planes had flown out. The Russians were now openly digging trenches, paying no attention to me. I still remained out of cover, although they must have suspected that I was being guarded by other tanks, for they had not yet guessed our plans. Horst's voice was heard. We are now in the woods, and so far everything is going well. We cannot move faster because on the road there is no place to fall apple, all filled with the Russian army, even in the forest. They are full of them. You can't pass through the field, even if you really want to. They are everywhere. Have there been any attempts to fire on you? No. There are thousands of infantrymen and ordinary people here, but they're all concerned about their safety. Listen, Horst, if there's danger ahead, don't hesitate, clear the way. If you have to, run over anyone you can, but don't slow down. We're travelling at a speed of 20 to 25 kilometres. I'm sorry, but that's the best we can do right now. Okay, if that's the situation, that's enough, I shouted. Don't retreat, keep moving forward, and when you come to a bend, get in touch again. The Russians worked harder than ever, erecting the temporary bridge, climbing on the pontoons, getting everything ready. In the next 20 minutes, maybe less, the tanks would be able to move across. If I had men available, I'd take that damn colonel prisoner, something that should have been done a long time ago. Yet I doubted it would have succeeded. The colonel was clearly a man of ingenuity and vividness of mind. While we were contriving to weaken his vigilance, he managed to double-cross us. We played cat and mouse with each other, but it was impossible to answer with certainty who was the cat and who was the mouse in this game. Okay, the boys will try to do their best. As the hours passed, I had almost completely forgotten that I was injured. The morphine shots had relieved me of the pain and given me a deceptive sense of strength and energy, but now that the drug was wearing off, I was beginning to feel indifferent and apathetic again. When the tension subsided a little and there was nothing left to do but wait, my alertness gradually dulled. There was an unbearable buzzing in my head, and I felt like I was going to pass out. No, not now, Georg, I said to myself. If we allow even one enemy tank to cross the bridge, we can consider that the 115th Division never existed. Again, it was now or never. My lips were dry and burning. Every word I uttered required incredible effort, but I still asked the guys if they had any water left. Dieter held out a bottle of vodka, but I didn't immediately realize what it was. A quarter of the bottle had been siphoned off. I held it back out. Let's have a drink. We may not get another chance. The bottle disappeared somewhere down below, and as it turned out, the whole bottom of the tank was littered with them. I drank quite a lot. The alcohol burned my throat and the whole of my stomach. The pain I had felt before resumed. But at the same time I felt my head clearing up and working more clearly. "Try to put me through to Willie," I said. He answered at once. "How are you?" I asked. "Fine. Ours are coming. They are 10 kilometers from here and I'm in constant contact with them," he answered me. "The Russians have lost their last hope of getting rid of us. In fact, I think they are already retreating, because the German artillery has already occupied all the roads. Recently, a whole regiment of Russian infantry passed within 100 meters of me, but I didn't even bother to shoot at them. There was no point in it. I just let them get away. Yeah, now we're just on vacation. Look, Willie, I need at least 3 tanks. When can I have them? 15 minutes if you have to. Hold on a second. I'll just give the command to go. Willie was back on the line in exactly 16 seconds. All right. Bock, Fuchs and Vogel are on their way to you, and if they don't get up to a speed of 65 kilometers when they go across the field, I promise I'll eat my cap. I don't think the Russians will have time to point their guns at them. You know, German tanks wouldn't be able to produce that kind of speed, especially under these conditions, on this kind of ground. I gave them instructions to stay on the same frequency as you. They can probably hear us talking right now. This war is coming to an end, Willie. The Russians prepared to strike at me to determine if any of our other tanks were nearby. I've put Lieutenant Bock on the line. Yes, Captain. Your call sign is 4. Vogel, can you hear me? Yes, I can. You'll answer to 5 and Fuchs to 6. How far away are you from me now? We are just passing our tanks on the river, answered Vogel. Do not stop there, I quickly told them. Another kilometre and directly bump into my tank, which stands openly in the middle of the field. We are completely on our own. Lieutenant Bock, you stand to my left, 100 metres away. Vogel and Fuchs, stop on my right. Try to be there in 3 minutes. The bridge is almost ready. I kept a close eye on what was happening in front of me and only occasionally looked around. All my attention was fixed on the hill. The 3 tanks still hadn't shown up. Finally, turning around, I saw them. They did get there lightning fast and took their positions in an organised manner. The Russians hesitated, evidently thinking it was the recently departed tanks returning, which meant they had no idea what was happening on the hill. We had managed to mislead them, and they were still in the dark. When the Russians saw the tanks coming, they opened barrage fire, which could do nothing to help them. I didn't want to risk trying to find out for myself if the tanks had made it to the hill, so I waited for their reports. In a few seconds, you'll see 3 tanks going around the hill, the same one where we set up the switchboard, I explained to the guys. They are ours. We will attack the Russians as soon as we see our own coming out from behind the hill. We have to cover them any way we can. We don't have much time. The tanks seemed to be following, moving intermittently from cover to cover. A few seconds later, I heard a shot. Bock's tank was firing. Immediately, there was an explosion at the other edge. I just spotted a truck filled with anti-tank mines, he explained. I had to clean it up. Naturally, I grinned. The Russian infantrymen kept us on our toes. From time to time, they fired at us, though without success. Finally, 3 tanks showed up in the distance, coming down from the high ground. Driving across the plain and past the next hill, they headed into the brush. I was so weak that I could hardly find the strength to watch them. Then I noticed that they had already opened fire. The infantrymen, who until then had been facing us, immediately turned around and rushed like madmen in the direction of their tanks. The Russians, who were on the opposite side of the river, joined the infantry and all together began to fire on ours, turning the hill into one continuous cloud of dust. It seemed as if, from nowhere, a huge grey wall had built itself, without a single crevice, into which even a mouse could hardly crawl. "It's time, boys!" I shouted. It was our turn. It was impossible to tell whether the tanks on the hill were intact or not. The Russians hit them using all the equipment they had, completely ignoring ours on the river. We carried on at full speed, forgetting about the infantry blocking our way. All of us had only one thought in our minds, to destroy that bridge by any means necessary. This time we had no doubt that they had abandoned their tanks and were running away. Now it seemed to me that all it would take was one glare from me, and the colonel would be struck dead. We were chasing, shooting everyone we saw, and the freshly spilled blood only increased the excitement. Each of the guys now wanted to show that he was as good as anyone in the unit, especially me. I could see bullets bouncing across the water coming down the hill, so I knew at least one of the tanks was capable. I hoped it was Horst's. We flew almost at airplane speed toward the bridge, and then, like mice, we scurried from tree to tree, bush to bush, and so on. The infantry who had attacked us so furiously were now retreating no less furiously. We had 500 meters to the bridge, so the Russians were forced to direct their fire in two directions, at us and at the hill. Nevertheless, we still had one advantage. We could remain in cover until the enemy's tanks climbed the embankment and their fire became truly dangerous to us. In the meantime, even the shells we fired blindly were effective. The sapper battalion stopped its work when it realized it was useless. The pontoons were already in the water, but they had no time to secure them. For some more seconds we did not start the attack, and the soldiers who were near the pontoons tried to fix them. Soon I noticed that no more shots were coming from the hill. The hope remained that my suspicions were not justified. Even minor firing raised so much dust that visibility became almost zero. Only now, when the tank was clearly visible on the embankment, we had a concrete target to hit. But we still had to somehow get to the bridge and destroy it. Our Air Force seemed to have completely forgotten about us, and just at the moment when we needed their help the most, a few dropped bombs could have destroyed the bridge without us. The battle was becoming more and more violent. The Russians tried to use any means against us, but we did not stay in debt and moved forward and back, manoeuvring from side to side, entering the open terrain, or, on the contrary, retreating. And they never stopped firing for a moment. The Russians didn't realize what we were doing. We would come out into the open and then disappear, not giving them a chance to catch a glimpse of how many of us there really were. If even Russian tanks came to their aid, they might start shooting at their own, mistaking them for the enemy. We were in the Russian tanks. We were getting closer and closer to the bridge. Fuchs, who was on the extreme left flank and therefore closest to the river, had the best opportunity to see the bridge. "I think they will try to drive the tanks across it at all costs," he shouted. "Then don't wait, start shelling the bridge." I put my Russian helmet on my head. "If one of their damn snipers happens to be in the area and decides to target us, maybe this tin can keep me a little safer." I indicated to Dieter where to follow. 3 tanks had already crossed the river and were on our side. If a couple more made it across the bridge, we'd have no chance of escape at all. It seemed that Fuchs had forgotten how to shoot because the volleys fired by his tank, without damaging the pontoons, fell into the water. I stopped the tank and gave the command to fire. The first shot did not reach the target, but the second hit right in the centre of the pontoon. All my attention was fixed on the bridge. The next shot, and again on target. I saw one of the Russian tanks turning off the bridge. Dieter kept aiming. I tried to contact the second and third, but they were no longer in contact. It felt like the tanks at the top of the hill had melted into thin air. I could only hope that some of the crew had still managed to get out. Suddenly to my right I saw Fuchs's tank fly upward with a roar and then, falling silently to the ground, catching fire. I stared at it in a daze for what seemed to me like an eternity, completely oblivious to the war. Never before had I been so close to a burning tank and could not believe that I was seeing this picture for real. The iron of which the vehicle was made was red hot, and the tank looked like a furnace. I thought I saw shadows of people trying to get out, but I knew it was just a play of imagination. None of them had a chance. The 3 Russian T-36 tanks that had managed to cross the bridge were now staring me right in the face. But Dieter's actions were faster than my words. He quickly released a shell, although from excitement he missed. It was unusual for him, especially from such a comfortable position. The first of the tanks opened fire on us. I leaned my head back against the hatch cover, feeling the metal rattle as the bullets pounded against it. But those blows weren't enough, and this time, aiming more accurately, Dieter made no mistake. The enemy tank was neutralized, but I could not believe my eyes because the tank continued to move on us. It couldn't be. Probably the wound had made itself felt and I was hallucinating. I shook my head and looked again. The tank was on fire. I guess I was slowly becoming delirious. The other 2 Russian tanks retreated a short distance and headed into a well-defended area. I ordered my crew to back up and try to find cover as well. Finally, we managed to find a ditch surrounded by dense shrubbery. I told us to turn right and then ordered Joachim to drive along the ditch for 50 meters. There, when we came face to face with the Russians again, we could camouflage ourselves among the trees. With no time to contact the rest of the tanks, Bock and I were forced to fight alone. Without noticing that the ditch ended, we again jumped out into the field. And here we were in for a shocking surprise. We ran right into a Russian tank standing only 200 meters away from us. Dieter spotted it before the others. The Russians were confused by our sudden appearance, and Dieter, without giving them a second thought, opened fire. That was for Fuchs. He burned just the same. Now there was one last tank left, and Bock was already after him. We rushed to his aid, and immediately came under heavy artillery fire. But we had to destroy that bridge at all costs, even at the cost of our own lives. And again the sappers crowded around it. They had not wasted any time while we were fighting the T-36. There were boards and sticks lying everywhere and people running in all directions. Dieter started firing at the bridge again. The soldiers ran, saving their lives. If the Russians had not been taken by surprise, they would have wiped us out long ago. But now, in the chaos that reigned, they were firing past, and their shells flew right, left, and lay far ahead and behind us. Their gunners could go no farther forward. We kept firing, and our bullets whistled out every few seconds. At last, Dieter stopped firing, and I saw that the pontoons had separated and were being carried by the current of the river toward us. I don't know if I screamed or not, just sharply threw back my head and raised my hand, and then, as if a jackhammer, started pounding on my head. As I lost consciousness, I felt hot blood running down my face and I fell backwards. Someone shook me by the shoulder. It felt like my whole body was made up of separate pieces. I thought I heard voices, but I wasn't sure. I needed time to absorb, to think about what had happened. I lay with my eyes open and tried to concentrate. What am I doing here, and where am I? I listened to the voices. Gradually they became clearer. There were two of them, but I couldn't make out the words. I realized who I was, and slowly began to remember the battle, the burning tanks, the guys, Fuchs's red-hot tank, and how I had been wounded in the head. Maybe I was a prisoner of war with the Russians. If so, it was better to die. Did I still have the death pill? I wanted to touch it to check, but I couldn't lift my hands or even move my fingers. I struggled to keep my eyes open and tried to make out who was talking. Concentrating, I tried to distinguish the words. It was a quiet German speech. The head wound was not very serious. He was very lucky. It's the lung that's worse, but I think he'll pull through. Making a tremendous effort, I decided to see if it was a German doctor who might also have been captured by the Russians. I saw a man in a white coat heading toward the headboard of my bunk just at that moment. We'll give him a blood transfusion, and it will be all right. He walked on, and I couldn't see him. I now realized that I was probably in a mobile field hospital, as I could feel the clatter of wheels beneath me the whole time. I kept looking around, and then I heard the doctor's voice behind me. It must have been near the driver's cabin. By the way, Admiral, it begs the question, who is this guy if he's getting such high-profile attention? Those were his last words, but there was no reply. I looked to the side. I was still in a fog in my head, so I couldn't focus on the figure of the man. I couldn't make out the man's face or age, but his form was familiar. A naval captain. His chest was studded with medals. I stared more and more closely, and his face slowly began to emerge. I couldn't believe my eyes. There could be no mistake. It was Willie. He was looking at me, smiling ironically as always. But where did he get that uniform? I continued to look around and jabbed at another man in a similar uniform. This just couldn't be it. Clamming up, I opened my eyes again and eyed him suspiciously. There was no doubt that I was hallucinating, but as I looked closer, I saw that the man was smiling too. "Hello, Captain." Admiral Canaris was standing in front of me. "It's a dream," I said to myself. "How could he be here? And even if he is, what's he doing here? All the more reason, then, where the hell am I?" I closed my eyes again, but the shaking and the incessant pounding of the wheels couldn't have been a dream. I was definitely awake. Then I heard Willie talking. "He's passed out again. No, I'm all right, I shouted, opening my eyes quickly, but I couldn't make another sound and lay there with my mouth ajar, feeling my mouth and throat dry. My tongue seemed paralyzed. I decided to ask for water, and the words barely escaped my lips. Admiral Canaris rose and, filling a field mug, very slowly brought it to my head and began to pour small gulps into my mouth. No need to talk, only as a last resort, and everything will be fine. I shifted my gaze to Willie. I thought you were dead. The water softened my tongue a little, and it felt a little easier. Shortly before I was wounded, about half an hour before, I received word that our troops under Colonel Becker's command were on their way, and that you were completely wiped out. They managed to save the situation, but not you. I'm not a ghost, Georg. We were indeed defeated, but 5 of us managed to survive. In a minute or two more, the Russians would have left nothing left of us. What happened to our tank? I think you'd better find out what happened to us first, and then it'll be your turn. But are you sure you can listen to a story? I clenched my teeth so that I wouldn't take my anger at him for saying that. All right, Georg. I see you still have some of your old-school spirit left in you. Willie made himself comfortable beside me and continued, We kept the Russians under control, and everything would have ended without problems. But their front was finally broken, and we got into the very epicenter of their frantic retreat from Odessa. Naturally, it was impossible to withstand such an onslaught. In less than half an hour, they turned the place where we were upside down, but we still did not let a detachment of tanks across the river. At that point, it was too late for the Russians to try anything. Our anti-tank guns drove the Russian retreat with all their might. Practically all the tanks on the other side had been neutralized and bombed. Therefore, from the time you found yourself alone with the Russian tanks, I continuously kept in touch with Bock. He reported verbatim on everything that was going on. I heard about 3 Russian tanks that managed to cross the bridge, and that your tank stood on its haunches while you were beating fiercely on the bridge, and before that you blew up 2 tanks, and Bock started to pursue the last one, but the Russians smashed it. Only your tank was left, and they managed to strike first, after which you were all concussed and unconscious. Lieutenant Peter radioed the completion of the operation, the 3rd tank he took over. Having finished with it, they pulled you and the guys out, put you on an elevated dry place, and left guards near you. And where is Peter now? I asked quietly. He rushed to drive off the infantry, which tried to crawl up to the place where you were lying. He was hit from the other side, or maybe from an anti-tank gun. I'm sorry, Georg, but none of them managed to get out of the burning tank. I closed my eyes and remembered the faces of all the guys I studied and fought with. For some reason, the image of Dieter, my valiant and most accurate marksman, was especially clear in front of me. How many men are left? I asked. 22. 22 out of 600. Are there any more wounded? No, just 22. I stared at the ceiling, and Willie looked away and out the window. All these years, days, weeks, hours, minutes had been experienced together. The 115th Division. Now I wished I was among them. Almost all of our boys were forever left lying in the forests and on the battlefields near Odessa. The pride of Germany is the Führer's children. Admiral Canaris entered the conversation. Did you all understand what Captain von Hoffen said? I looked at him for a long time and then nodded. He knew for sure how I felt. You guys did an amazing job, he said in a soft voice. You've done more than your duty. You've done something no one expected. Your country called you and you went and died for it. You are suffering now as perhaps no one has ever suffered, but the only thing I can say is that this is war. It sounds cliché, but that's what it's all about. I grieve with you, Captain. I nodded, not really listening to what he was saying. The Führer himself appointed me commander of Das Reich, and I gave orders, sometimes overstepping and suppressing emotions. The plane picked us up almost as soon as the battle was over. I was at Das Reich at 11 o'clock, but if you guys hadn't cornered those tank units, it would have cost us thousands of German lives. Each of you saved hundreds of lives, and you should be proud, as I am now. But despite the fact that you have been unconscious for more than 24 hours, do not think that the war is over for you. In the meantime, it is the Führer's wish that you recover as soon as possible. You know, I'm sure he's genuinely worried about you, because people like you are indispensable to the country." Willie and I laughed quietly, and the pain immediately made itself felt. "And by the way, you need to forget that your last name is Kirillov. Such a person no longer exists, and, in fact, there was never any Grigory Kirillov," he continued. "Now your name is Baranov, Vasily Baranov, from Smolensk." I groaned, looking at the laughing faces in front of me. "But the first thing you will do is head to the hospital, and then back to the 3rd Prussian Navy Division for exercises. I wish you a speedy recovery, Baranov." I stared at the ceiling and then turned my gaze to the 2 men sitting beside me. The carriage suddenly jolted, and I lost consciousness.